have a chat, shall we? Hey, welcome back to the channel, guys. And I know some time ago I said that I would do a video about going from a Model X to a Model 3. And today is that day. I'm going to sit down and actually do this video. Now, if you guys are new to the channel, welcome. Take a moment, subscribe. I've noticed about 60% of you are actually watching my videos, and for a long time, but you're not subscribing. So please take a moment, subscribe to the channel. Only takes 2 seconds, and besides, it's free. So in case you didn't know, I bought a Model X in December of 2017, and I kept it until the latter part of this summer. And at that time, I decided to make a change, and I bought a Performance Model 3. That's the car I'm sitting in right now. Now, instead of me sitting here and rambling and trying to put my ideas into some kind of cohesive, story, I thought I would reach out to Twitter and YouTube to see if you guys had any questions about anything in particular that you would like to know about. And boy, did you guys deliver. So I got over 80 questions. So I want to say thank you for everybody who submitted. And what I've done here is I've actually put all these lists here on my phone, and I've tried to condense it down because there were a lot of repetitive type of questions. So let's jump in and start answering some of these questions. So the first question comes, oh, I have to put my glasses on. I'm an old man, right? Now I see better. First question comes from Jay Pace. He says, handling and performance differences. Is parking easier? In case you didn't know, the Model X that I had was a 75D, so it was kind of like the base model. I think the 0 to 60 on that was somewhere in 6 seconds or so. It felt faster than that. This car, Performance Model 3, right now with the latest software update, it does, 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. So definitely a higher performance car. The Model X was definitely no slouch, but this car is just a hell of fun. As far as handling is concerned, it feels different. The suspension on the Model X, in case you didn't know, air suspension. So when you're driving around, it feels a little more plush, but I don't miss it in this car, even though it has springs in this car. I think it's more appropriate for a car like this because it's a little sportier, it feels a little stiffer and stuff, so I don't mind that. As far as parking is concerned, yeah, this car is a lot easier to park. The Model X is a big car, and if you look back a few videos back this past summer, early part of the summer, I curbed one of my wheels. Not in a parking accident, it was just one of those parking lot type of things. Anyways, cost me a few dollars to get that fixed. Luckily, I haven't had that problem in this car yet because it is definitely a smaller car, so it's definitely easier to park. The next question comes from Kay Dyson, and this was a very common question I had. Is there a big difference in the ride comfort? Does the Model X have a more comfortable ride? As I just mentioned with Jay, the air suspension on the Model X is definitely offering a more plush ride. I came from a Lincoln prior to that, so if you're into the luxury thing, if that's the kind of ride you want, the Model X is definitely a more comfortable ride as far as that's concerned. But again, I want to reiterate that the springs in the Model 3 are set up really well. It's actually a very comfortable ride. It's a little stiffer, but I think it's more appropriate for a car that's a little sportier. I will talk about the seats difference maybe a little bit later in this video because that is something that I want to make a point of. So the next question comes from James Scholler. He says, visibility while driving and changing lanes. Yeah, the visibility in the Model 3 is actually really good. Not as good as the Model X in terms of driving because you've got that great big windshield that goes up and above your head. But if you were to compare cars, like if you take a Model S, for example, and you compare that to a Model 3, the visibility in the Model 3 is better. The greenhouse, as we call it, the glass that's in this car, is much taller than the Model S. And the fact that this A-pillar, not the A-pillar here, but this cross member and the lower windscreen gives you better visibility outside the car when driving. That's just my personal opinion. I find myself to be a little bit more claustrophobic when I'm driving a Model S, but I don't have that problem in the Model 3. So in the same vein, the next question comes from CW. He asks, difference in dashboard height, what does it offer for the open feeling forward? The difference in getting in and out of the cars. Again, as I mentioned, the Model X windshield is an amazing feature. If you've never experienced it, highly recommend it. I was actually a little disappointed that they didn't put it on the Model Y, for example, but hey, it did make it into the Cybertruck, so that's a great feature. I wish the Model 3 actually moved this cross member a little further back, maybe somewhere back here, eliminated this one, and put the big windshield on it. I think that would be amazing on the Model 3. As far as getting in and out of the car, yeah, it's a little more difficult because the car sits lower. The Model X, being an SUV or a crossover, sits a little higher up off the ground. The seats are also on risers, so that makes getting in and out of the car a lot easier on the Model X. But On the Model 3, one of the things that I've done on mine is I have my driver profile tied to the easy entry, and the easy entry setting I've set so that my seat comes all the way up. So the moment I unbuckle, the seat comes up, and it makes getting in and out of the car a little bit easier. Elon did say that they were going to perhaps add a memory feature for the passenger side. I'm hoping that that comes, so it'll make it easier for my wife to get in and out of. I don't think it's that big of a difference, but if you do have mobility problems, Model X is better suited for that. When the Model Y comes out, I think it'll hit a happy medium between, say, the Model 3 and the Model X. For those people who are looking for something that's not quite as fancy as the Model X, but gives you that SUV type of feeling. So the next question comes from Pandora Gate. Awesome username, by the way. How does the spaciousness and legroom for the backseat passengers compare between the two models? Well, the Model X has a lot more legroom for the second row passengers on account of, well, several things. The seats are flush back. I mean, the Model X has a longer wheelbase, so inside cabin space is much, much larger. Yeah, the second row seats are very comfortable on the Model X, especially if you have the configuration which I did, which was the 6-seat variant. Those are the ones with the two captain's chairs that move. There are some limitations with that configuration, however, because those seats don't fold down. So if you're the type of person that wants to carry a lot of cargo in the car, I don't recommend that configuration. The 5-seat or the 7-seat that has the second row bench seat that folds down 60/40 is a much better configuration for that. The 6-seat, again, it's more of a people mover, so if you want ultimate and comfort, that is the configuration I would recommend. Second seat row on the Model 3, well, anybody who sat back there is, it's fairly spacious. However, the fact that the floor is elevated, being, you know, because the battery pack is there, many people have complained in the past that taking long rides in the cars or long road trips can be a little bit fatiguing for the legs. So I understand where that's coming from. The Model X doesn't really suffer from that, being that it's taller, and of course the seats being on risers. So anyways, my personal opinion, I think for long distance driving, the Model X is a more comfortable ride. Not that the Model 3 is bad, it's just not as comfortable based on, you know, how the car is actually set up with the seating. So the next question comes for Jermaine Langhorn, who asks, how was the transition? Easy, a bit challenging, etc.? Well, as far as, well, here's the thing. Teslas are Teslas, so the tech is fantastic between the cars. I didn't find the transition particularly difficult. I was already used to the Model 3, being the Model 3 guy. So for me, the transition wasn't that bad. I mean, there's a few things that I miss from the Model X. Maybe I'll talk about that here in a little bit. I have to say, as far as driving is concerned, this is a more fun car. Again, I didn't have the ludicrous Model X, the one with the bigger battery pack. I have driven those cars. They're a lot of fun, but this car comes very close. So anyways, my personal opinion, this is a more fun car to drive, but I didn't find the transition to be particularly difficult. So the next question comes from Baby Tesla, and this was also another very popular question. Do you miss the dual screens? The answer is no, I don't miss the dual screens. Now, the reason I say that is because I, as a previous owner of many different cars, have already experienced and owned 2 different cars in the past that had a single screen. Now, I know a lot of noise has been made about the Model 3 having a single screen. The thing is that there have been many other cars in the past that already had that set up. I owned both a 2003 or 2004, I can't remember, Nissan Quest minivan that had a center screen. And I also owned, for a short period of time, a 2007 Toyota Yaris that also had the instrument cluster in the middle. So for me, it was not an adjustment in any shape or form. I was already used to that. However, I will say this. There's something about an instrument cluster that is nice to get a little bit more data. However, the way that Tesla set up the informational part of the screen, namely the first third of the instrument cluster, or the center screen on the Model 3 for the situational awareness and the autopilot, I really like that. I mean, I have to wear glasses, so for me to be able to see the autopilot data in the instrument cluster on the Model X was a little bit more difficult. I prefer it the way that they've set it up in the Model 3 because it's larger, I can see more stuff. I wish the car had a little bit bigger screen because the navigation stuff that takes up the rest of the 2/3 of the screen I think is a little bit small, especially when we bring up the media player. As far as I'm concerned, dual screens is great. It has its pluses, it has its minuses. On the plus side, again, I'll just mention the center screen on the S and the X is nicer because you can do things like split screen, so you can have navigation and media player up at the same time. The Cybertruck having a 17-inch horizontal screen I think is going to be an awesome setup. And when Tesla, it's not an if, it's when Tesla gets around to updating the S and the X interior and get that new treatment, I think they're going to hit a very nice sweet spot with those cars in that larger screen setup. coffee. All right, another question that came from many different people. Manny XD asks, are there any features of the X you wish your 3 had? Yes, and one of them is not one of the things that you might think. You might think that I would like to have Falcon wing doors. I'll be honest with you. Falcon wing doors, I could take it or leave it. I understand why Tesla did it on the Model X. They are functional, they do work, but they have their annoyances. For me, they were great when I went to car shows because the car got lots of attention, but it is not the reason I bought the Model X. Now, as far as features are concerned, there are 2, maybe 3 things that I miss on the Model 3. One is the self-opening and closing doors. Now, on the Model X, in case you don't know this, the doors are automated. So if you press the button to open the door opens by itself. And at least on the driver's side, when you get in, you put your foot on the brake and the door closes. That, I tell you, is an awesome feature. And there are many days I get into my Model 3 and I'm like, oh, I don't have that. I really, really wish I had that feature on the Model 3. The second feature, as I mentioned previously, I would really like to have the bigger windscreen. I mean, this is great, but having it bigger would just make this even better. The third one is the power liftgate. I had many cars before I had a power liftgate. Fantastic feature. Again, I understand why Tesla didn't put it on the Model 3. Most cars in this segment, the small sedan segment, don't have a power liftgate anyway. If they do, it's usually a higher end option feature. Not all manufacturers offer it, but I did rectify it because I did install a third-party one. I'll put a link down in the video description if you guys want to buy one. I did a video on that install. You can go and maybe I'll put a link somewhere up here. You guys can watch that video if you want. But having that power liftgate on the car now, I really like it. I'm going to change my tune on that feature because I did say in the video in the past that I wasn't too sure whether it was actually worth it. Listen, if you want to spend the money, I do recommend it. It is really nice to have. So those are the things I miss on the Model X compared to the Model 3. So the next question comes from my friend Lars at Tesla Para Todos YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to him. And this was also a common question that many other people had. What do you miss the most about the Model X? What would they have to change on the X in order for you to select it over the Model 3 again? And what does Bev think? That's a very good question. My personal opinion about the Model X, as great of a car it is showing its age because it's based on the Model S technology. It was developed many years before. The Model 3, other than the mirror, rear view mirror, is really an all-new car. It's literally new from the ground up. I think for me to choose a Model X again, if I was to choose one, I think the Model X really needs a powertrain. No, not the Raven powertrain, but when I say powertrain, I'm talking about the battery and the power electronics. I would like to see an update. I would like to see them use what they've developed in the Model 3 because the Model 3 is much more efficient. It doesn't have the separate battery heater. It uses waste heat scavenging. So it's a more efficient car that way. Listen, the Model X is a pig. And when I mean pig, I mean that in the nicest way possible. I'm talking about energy usage. When I would go on long trips, the Model X would use considerably more energy. Because I'm on kilometers, it would use somewhere in the vicinity of 350, sometimes 400 watt hours per kilometer. The Model 3 on my car is way, way, way more efficient. So for longer trips and the amount of supercharging stops that I have to make, the Model 3 is much more efficient. So if they were to parlay some of that Model 3 technology, put that into the Model X and make it way more efficient, I think that would be really great. Now, again, the Model X is a bigger car. It's worse in terms of aerodynamics. It weighs more. I get it. It's 5,500 pounds. This thing is about 3,400 pounds. So those things make a difference. But again, there are some efficiencies that I think they can change in the car. If they would give it the Model 3 Dash treatment, and again, it will happen, it's just a matter of time, those are things that I think the Model X would just put it back at the top of the game. But again, it's not selling all that great anymore because Model 3 is kind of taken over. Model Y is coming, and I think that's going to really fill the gap for many people that want an SUV but don't want to spend the big bucks on the Model X. I totally get it. Speaking of which, I should talk about the seats because I did mention earlier. Now, the seats in the Model 3 are really, really good seats, but they're not as good as the Model X. And that is a comment that my wife has made. She misses the Model X for 2 reasons. One of them is it's higher off the ground, so it's easier to get in and out of the car. And the second one for her is that she's been complaining about the seats. She finds that the Model 3 seats, I should say, are not as comfortable. I get it. I would tend to agree with that. I don't have a problem with these seats. I'll tell you one thing, my wife's Volkswagen Golf, as good of a car as it is for the price point, the seats are garbage. I get in that car, any kind of long distance driving I do in it, I get hip pain. It's just horrible. I don't get that in this car. I never got it in the Model X, so highly recommend that car if you want really comfortable seats. Mike21 asks, do you miss the extra room, unlimited free supercharging, and lifetime premium connectivity? How much of a factor did the increase in range factor into your decision? Do you get a good price selling the X? Do I miss the extra room? Yes and no. I think in terms of cargo space, this car has been amazing, all things considered. I've said this many times before. If you're new to the channel, well, I'll just reiterate for you guys. When we go on long trips, my wife does not pack lightly. We have a bit of a joke. If we could bring the stove with us, we would. But so far, we've been on several trips with this car, and the cargo space has not been an issue. I just play a little better game of what I call Tesla Tetris. The Model X that I had the 6-seat configuration, so because the second row seats didn't fold, how you pack the car was not as efficient as, say, the 7 or the 5-seat configuration, where the second row and the third row fold completely flat. The front trunk, or the frunk on the Model 3, as you know, is small compared to the Model X, but I never really used the Model X frunk to its greatest advantage. I would tend to put coolers in there, things that need to be kept cold, and I basically do the same thing in this car. So as far as packing is concerned, not an issue. One of the reasons I bought the Model X at the time, because my needs dictated, because my business was still busy at the time and needed to move some large boxes. I don't do that anymore, so I don't need the extra space. And second of all, I thought I needed a people mover. Well, it turns out it didn't move too many people. Downsize. Works for me. I'm getting a little older. I love to wash my car. The Model X, I would always have to pull up my step ladder to wash the car. That got old very quick. As far as unlimited free supercharging is concerned, yeah, that was a nice perk I had on the Model X, but I'm very fortunate because the amount of referrals that I've got from people that have used my referral code. I have lots of supercharging. Matter of fact, I have some 180,000 kilometers of free supercharging on this car, so I don't essentially pay for supercharging on this car, so it's awesome. Lifetime premium connectivity. Well, I've only had my car for 3 months, so I'm still within the 1 year of free connectivity. Interestingly enough, no Canadian cars at this point are showing any kind of notice in the screen yet that shows you an expiry date as far as your connectivity is concerned. So I expect that to be updated sometime in the near future, unless there's a rule that says that we have to be guaranteed that. I don't know at this point. So right now, I'm not too worried about it. I did a video on the changes that Tesla's implemented as far as connectivity is concerned. I'm not decided as far as what's going to happen when my year is up, whether I pay the connectivity. Listen, $10 a month is not a big deal. I spend more than that in 3 days on coffee, so I'm not worried about the cost. The premise of the fact that I'm already paying for a very expensive data plan on my phone, and the fact that I can actually tether to my phone, minus the inconvenience of it always turning off Wi-Fi when I put it in drive. Anyways, I'll decide that for later, but I'm not worried about the connectivity at this point. Again, range, yes, that was a factor that mattered into this. I ended up doing a lot more road trips in my Model X than I thought I would. And let me tell you, doing 2, sometimes 3 more supercharging stops that I have to do in this car, that gets old very quickly. So range is king. I live in Canada, the winter months come in, and range is severely affected, especially on the Model X. So for me, I needed to make sure I had a long range car, and the fact that the Performance Model 3 came down in price at the same time was a factor in me selling the car. Now, as far as your question is concerned here, did I get a good price for selling the X? You know what? I was happy with the price that I got. I felt that it was fair compared to comparables on the market. You know, things might be different now, but at the time, I was happy with what I got. I was very fortunate in the sense that I had a lot of equity in the car. So when I sold it, I was not upside down. Upside down means that you owe more than the car's worth that when you sell it or you trade it in. So that was not a problem. That money went into this car. So my monthly price on this car is less than I was paying on the Model X, considerably less. I only financed it for 4 years. Next question comes from Rene Caldera. He asks, were the Falcon wing doors truly useful or just cool to have? Do you miss them? Do I miss them? No, I don't miss them. Are they cool? Yeah, when you go to car shows. In real life, yeah, they're useful. There's a lot of Model X's around here, so we don't get quite the looks that maybe some other places, maybe in the rural areas, when you open up the doors. You have to be prepared for that. Do they work? Yeah, they work. They never gave me any trouble whatsoever. However, they can be a little bit persnickety. Strange word, but it's one that I use when you're in a parking garage or low ceiling environment, because the doors have sensors in them. They're designed not to hit anything. So because they're so timid, there are times when you open the doors and you have to duck down, and sometimes you have to override them and stuff. So there are times when they got a little annoying, but they do work. I understand why they did them, but honestly, I don't miss them, and I'm glad they didn't do it on the Model Y. There's no reason the Model Y needs Falcon Wing doors. Vermont Dad asks, how do you feel about the loss of OEM tow on the X versus gaining a roof rack on the Model 3? Well, that's a really good question. First of all, I don't have a roof rack on my Model 3 because I installed an Eco Hitch. It's an aftermarket hitch that you can buy. The Model 3 is designed to have a hitch. Matter of fact, you can order it such in Europe. Here in North America, for whatever reason, Tesla has not made it available. But the Eco Hitch is relatively affordable. It's very easy to install. And I'm not towing anything. I just put a bike rack on the back. I didn't want to put anything on the roof of this car, mainly because that severely affects range. Matter of fact, last year when we went on vacation to Vermont with the Model X, I had my bike rack on the back with 2 mountain bikes. And let me tell you, on highway speeds, boy, do you ever lose range. Somewhere in the vicinity of about 25%. So it was like dragging a parachute. So next question comes from Donna. Do you think the vents work better or worse than the X? And do you prefer the landscape screen over the portrait? I really like the vent system on the Model 3. I think it's innovative. However, as far as ease of use, when you want to very quickly adjust something, yeah, it's a couple of buttons to press. I never really found myself adjusting the vents on the Model X all that much anyway. Same thing goes for the Model 3. Matter of fact, because it's colder in the winter months now, I tend to keep my vent, at least on the driver's side, pointing right at the top of my steering wheel to keep my hands warm. So that works quite well. Great winter tip, by the way. I think it's the future. Obviously, they've done it in the Tesla semi-truck. It's done on the Model Y. They did it on the Cybertruck. Again, one more time, it's just a matter of time before they do it to the S and the X. So I think it's a brilliant system, and it shows the future of Tesla's direction as far as that's concerned. As far as the other question, do you prefer the landscape or the portrait? You know, both have their pluses and minuses. I mentioned before. Right now, I'm used to the landscape screen. I really like it. And right now, I'm kind of leaning towards that. I like that setup at this point. So thanks for asking. Alex Cook asks, do you get leg cramps? Who shuts the trunk for you? Does it really feel better to have the most up-to-date MCU and autopilot hardware? Oh, really good questions. Do I get leg cramps? No, not in this car. I actually don't get leg cramps. I used to get hip pain. I think, again, that has to do with the comfort of the seats and the bolstering. I don't have that problem on Model 3, so far so good. And who shuts the trunk for you? As again I mentioned, I have the power liftgate on my car, so that works really well. Again, his last question, do you really feel better to have the most up-to-date MCU and autopilot hardware? Whoa, that's a good question. You know, Elon had said before that there was going to be an MCU, that's the main computer unit, the one that drives the main screen on the S and the X, as far as an upgrade was concerned on the Model X, and it never transpired. I had money set aside to perhaps do that upgrade, and it is something that bothered me. You know, the Model 3 screen is very responsive. I really like the way it works. Again, I didn't touch the screen all that much, but when you go in and you type in an address and the system has to calculate supercharging distances and your navigation route, that took considerably longer on the S and the X. On the Model 3, it's, you know, obviously a lot faster. There are some nice things about the horizontal screen that I like. The fact that when you put a navigation screen in, the screen tilts a little bit to show you kind of like a bird's eye view. I like that feature. That's quite nice. But that, again, that's a cosmetic thing. But yeah, it does make me feel better in a lot of ways, and I think that's one of the reasons I chose the Model 3 as the car to go to after selling the X, was because the tech in the car is so much more advanced. And for me, being in the computer business, well, that spins my little propeller, and I like that kind of thing. I understand they did upgrade the MCU in the current Model X's and S's as of about May, I think, of 2018. But again, I wasn't in a position to sell it just to upgrade to that. I wanted something different. So had I bought a new S or an X, mostly an X, yeah, I would have got the new MCU, but I still wouldn't have the new horizontal layout, which I'm kind of tending to prefer. Which kind of ties into the next question from John P. Do you feel like the S is old tech now? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. The Model X has been continuously upgraded over the years, just like the Model S has. But again, you know, this layout of the dash, and again, the powertrain, I'm talking battery and power electronics, haven't been updated yet. And I think those are the biggest things that are missing from those cars. Once they do that, that'll elevate those cars. I don't think the car needs necessarily a refresh on the outside. I think those cars still look fantastic. I don't have the problem with the way that they look. but there's some tech stuff in those cars that really need updating. And again, I'm just going to reiterate one more time. I think it's a matter of time. It's, you know, just resources. Tesla just doesn't have enough resources to do all that stuff. So I think it's going to happen. You just have to be patient. Next question comes from Guy Churchward. He says, if you had a 3, would you move to an X? Well, that's a really good question. And I think some of you out there might be thinking the same thing. Maybe you have a 3, you're thinking about moving to a Model X, not too sure, maybe a Model Y. I think if you have a growing family and you need the extra space, maybe you want a little extra comfort, I think the Model X is an excellent car, provided you can afford it. Again, we have Model Y coming very soon. That's going to bridge that gap for a lot of people. So I think the Model Y, personally, if I had a choice right now, that might be the car I would actually choose. There's not much in the Model X other than maybe a little bit more interior space, and if you like the Falcon wing doors, that might be your thing. That's probably the better car to get. Again, air suspension, if it matters to you, that's something you have to look at. You have to determine whether you're, whether that's important to you. Take one for a drive, compare the two. I would say drive a Model 3, then drive a Model X, and then you'll get an idea of what the Model Y feels like, because it's going to have the same setup suspension-wise as the Model 3. Again, in the same vein, another question from Dave Thomas. I'd like to know how well you think, given the comparison, the upcoming Y will bridge the gap. Yes, I think so. Again, Model Y is kind of halfway between the 3 and the X. I was very fortunate to be at the Model Y event. I rode in the car. It feels just like a Model 3 on the interior. It's just got a little bit more headroom here, bigger windscreen or glass in the back for the people, and taller front trunk, a little bit more cargo room in the back. The smaller seats in the back, the third row, really tiny, not really appropriate for adults. Small kids, maybe. Think of like the jump seats in the Model S and kind of reverse them the other way around. Anyways, until we know any more data on those, that's kind of my feeling on that. But I think it's going to do exceptionally well because that's what the market wants. The next question comes from Braden Koch. I would like to know, why on earth you went from an X to a 3? Well, again, circumstances change. When I bought the Model X, it was two things. Dream car. I mean, who wouldn't want a Model X? I mean, it's a great car. But as far as I was concerned, the Model 3, if I was going to buy one, I wanted a performance Model 3. And when I bought the Model X, because I was ready to lay my money down to buy a Tesla, Model 3 performance didn't exist. Now, in my case, it worked out in my favor because, you know, the changes that Tesla did in terms of the paint, I like white. I got that for free, didn't pay extra for that. And the fact that they dropped the price on the performance Model 3, you know, I had to strike when the timing was right. So for me, it worked out quite well. And as I said before, I had lots of equity in the Model X. So it was time to sell before it would devalue any more than it did. So those are my decisions as far as that's concerned. I'm happy. I don't miss the Model X. It was a great car. I would love to have a second one as another car to drive, but I just don't have the room in my garage or my driveway to have a second car. I did win a couple of Roadsters. One of them is pre-sold. The other one I am going to keep, but it will not be stored here. I'll put that in a secure facility that's warm. It'll be a fair weather car. It's not going to be driven in the winter or the rain or that type of thing. So that's what's going to happen with that. As far as the Cybertruck is concerned, yes, I did put a reservation down because that is another question that came up quite often. Again, the Cybertruck for us is kind of forward thinking. We're getting closer and closer to retirement. One of the things my wife wants to do is to get some kind of motorhome as an initial retirement thing to do before we possibly move to another country. Don't know yet. So for us, the motorhome, again, I like the idea of a motorhome, but when you have to go anywhere or do anything, you have to unpack. I mean, it's just not convenient. So I think the Cybertruck fills the need of having an electric vehicle that can tow more than a Model X can. So that's at least a couple years in the future before we get that truck, even if I decide to pull the trigger. So anyways, we'll see what happens. Part of me wants to get one so I can do some awesome videos for you guys. Those are my thoughts on going from a Model X to a Model 3. And if you're thinking about moving from a Model 3 to a Model X, again, these are my opinions. Your opinion might differ, but I highly encourage you, try both cars if you're in that market. Make a decision for yourself. But personally, if I was looking at these cars, I would wait for the Model Y. At that point, you can make a better decision. I'm not trying to say don't buy a Model X. If that's what you really want, go for it. But if you're still sitting on the fence, I would say maybe wait a little bit. Check out the Model Y and then determine what your needs are from that point. So anyways, I want to say thank you for watching the video. If you like it, give it a big thumbs up. And again, don't forget, subscribe to the channel because it makes things grow. And heck, I know a lot of you are watching the videos, so just subscribe. It helps everybody. Anyways, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you on the next video.